Well, the idea of World War III is on everyone's mind. The U.S. continues to escalate tensions with China by accusing them of a whole host of crimes, some true, some not. The U.S. has accused China of spying on the U.S., using balloons and TikTok, releasing COVID, committing genocide against the Uyghurs, stealing patents, unfair trade practices, and more. But interestingly, China hasn't yet retaliated by lobbying similar accusations against the U.S. Instead, they just seem to be quietly making moves to undermine U.S. hegemony, only causing the U.S. to increase its posturing against the nation. The latest, besides attempting to ban TikTok, is Speaker Kevin McCarthy inviting Taiwan's President, Tsai Ing-wen, to meet with him while she's in Los Angeles. Ing-wen is passing through the United States while going on a diplomatic tour to some of the few nations that recognize Taiwan, Guatemala and Belize. She'll first go through New York, head to Latin America, then back through Los Angeles on her way home to Taiwan. And while here in LA on April 5th, there's a tentatively scheduled meeting with the speaker. And China is not happy. They're promising to retaliate if the meeting happens. Now, last year, when Nancy Pelosi made an official visit to Taiwan, China retaliated by Beijing launching missiles over the area. They deployed warships across the median line of the Taiwan Strait, and their military carried out simulated blockade of the island. Beijing also suspended climate talks with the U.S. and restricted military-to-military communication with the Pentagon. The president of Taiwan meeting with McCarthy, while essentially on a layover in Los Angeles, is certainly not as threatening as the speaker flying to the island on an official meeting. But everyone is worried if this is another step closer to World War III. But I don't think so. In fact, I don't think China will ever need to fire a single bullet to eventually take over Taiwan. When they say they'll do whatever it takes to reunify, even if it means by force, I don't think they mean by military force, and we're going to get into this. Right now, only 13 countries recognize Taiwan as its own independent nation. And just last week, Honduras joined a growing list of nations no longer willing to recognize Taiwan as they shift towards opening up economic ties to China. Before Honduras' announcement, they had 14 diplomatic allies, down from 56 that it had in 1971 when it lost recognition from the United Nations, and down from 22 since President Tsai Ing-wen took office in 2016. So that number is drastically dwindling. Nations are wanting more direct contact with China, more trade with China as China opens up their Belt and Road, as China grows larger and larger economically. We even just saw today China doing a deal with Brazil. They're dropping the dollar. Two mega nations will be trading with each other, and they won't be using the U.S. dollar as an intermediary ever again. They're going to be trading in their own currencies. So China doesn't need to do anything except isolate Taiwan and hold economic power over them and others, in fact. They can economically just strangle Taiwan in order to get the nation in their grips, rather than having to go through any sort of military action. Currently, Taiwan's largest trading partner by far is China. If suddenly they were to go to war, for example, they would be blocked off from China trade. That's 25% of trade with Taiwan. It happens with China. Japan is their second largest trading partner at 11%, Hong Kong at 8%, South Korea at 6%. So they rely heavily on China. And China wouldn't even need to go to war. They would just, if they really wanted to, by force, push Taiwan closer to them, say, you must join us, we must be one government, you could be your own state, your president now becomes a governor, essentially. But you have to be part of China. You have to recognize yourself part of China. All they have to do is cut off economic trade with Taiwan. That would be by force. That would strangle the Taiwanese people, their economy. Goods and services would drastically reduce. We saw what happened during the pandemic. The United States and China are not each other's largest trading partners. We do get a lot of goods from China, but our largest trading partners are Mexico and Canada. But we saw what happened during the pandemic when ties were cut because supply chains were cut, because everybody was in lockdown. We saw the economic damage that did to our country, and China's not even our largest trading partner. Now look around in the whole entire Asian region. Everybody thinks that, well, if we were to go to war with China, what would happen? Japan would join us, South Korea would join us, the Philippines would join us, Australia would join us, that we would be able to surround China in this World War III. But is that true? Because when you actually look around at the largest trading partners for those nations, guess what? It's China. China is the largest trading partner for Japan, making up 19%. The United States makes up 18%. So it's about equal in Japan, but China still has a little bit of the edge. South Korea is 7% of Japan's trade, Hong Kong 4%. When you look at South Korea, would South Korea be joining us on this World War III if we were to march into this with China as we continue to posture? Well, China's largest trading partner, China, at 25%. The United States is 14% of South Korea's trade. Vietnam, 9%, Hong Kong, 5%. So South Korea also extremely reliant on China when it comes to trade. Philippines, the United States still has the edge at 16%, China at 15%, Japan at 14%, Hong Kong at 13%. They've got a pretty even trade going on there in the Philippines. So, okay, maybe Philippines would join in on this, but again, China is still a major trading partner to the Philippines. Now, what about Australia? Australia, our big Western ally as we create AUKUS, and the Australian people, many of them are very concerned about AUKUS, thinking, is this really a good idea? Do we really need to be marching ourselves into a conflict with our largest trading partner right here in our own neck of the woods? Is this a good idea? Because guess what? For Australia, China constitutes 25% of their trade. 25%. Japan is 12%. That's their second largest trading partner. South Korea, 6%. India, 3%. So you can see even Australia is highly reliant on China. So how would this all play out if we continue this posture, if we continue this marching towards World War III, this rhetoric, this inviting their president to meet with us so that we can continue to make ourselves look strong, like China, we're coming after you. How does this actually play out in the end? None of these nations are going to join in on World War III when China's their largest trading partner. And again, we saw what happened in the United States when the United States, with the pandemic hit, and we couldn't get the goods and services. We realized we are highly reliant on China, and they're not even our largest trading partner. I can't stress that enough. So this idea that we're going to be going to war over Taiwan, China doesn't need to even pull a single trigger in order to win the war. All they would have to do is economically isolate and say, all right, Taiwan, we're isolating you economically. If you're going to play like this, if you're going to continue on like this, if you're going to turn yourself into Ukraine by increasingly cozying up to the West, nations that are not anywhere near you, and you're going to continue to isolate and posture against us and ruffle feathers, then all they would have to do, they wouldn't need to invade. It's very different than Russia. Russia has a very large trading partner with Ukraine as well, but their goods and services, the types of trades they do there are very different than what China is able to do. And not only that, but Russia doesn't have the influence around the world in order to get other nations to join in and cut off Ukraine. Russia didn't have that sort of power. So with Ukraine, it became an actual military conflict. But with China, it's a very different thing. China's going around the world making all of these deals with big nations like Brazil today, getting to the point where the diplomatic ties with Taiwan, recognizing Taiwan as its own independent nation, could go from 56 down to 13 in a matter of just a few decades. That's the type of power that China has been gaining around the world economically. They haven't been building bases all around the world. They've been doing partnerships, deals, transactions, building economic ties. That is how they're conquering the world in this way. That is how they're becoming the new rising sun in the entire world, where they're going to replace the United States, and it's through this means, these economic means. So in looking at all of this, I know many of us are very worried about a World War III. I know many of us are worried that we're going to get up into a hot war with China. It's going to be a military conflict. But, really, it's not looking like that's ever even going to need to be in the playbook. China does these military exercises. After the last visit with Pelosi, they do these simulated blockades, and they're just speaking a language they think Americans understand. We understand military, we understand war, so they were just trying to speak our language. But ultimately, China is distracting by doing that. Oh, you want to talk about retaliate? Okay, fine, we'll do these little flyovers and blockade simulations, but ultimately, on the flip side, what they're doing when we're not really paying attention is they're economically building all of these ties. They're economically making themselves so powerful that countries around the world will do whatever China wants. The other countries around the world, when they build up these economic ties, they will just, when China says, now we have to gain Taiwan by force. And that does not mean military. That means we're going to cut them off economically. And if you do not join us, we're going to cut you off economically as well. It's the same thing the United States has been doing. It's a bit of a page from our own playbook when it comes to sanctions, how we've been sanctioning countries around the world. China definitely doesn't want to get to that point. But if they need to, they probably would. And they would have the power to do it because they've been building up those relationships while we've been building bombs. So it's definitely a strategy for us to be paying attention to, in that the world is so interconnected at this point. It is very difficult to wage war with one another. And Europe has really felt this when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. They're feeling the squeeze with not being able to get that Russian natural gas, with not being able to get the imports that they gain from Russia. They're feeling it. And the rest of the world would feel it as well if China said, it's time to feel it. We're going to get what we want. We're going to get it slowly. We're going to get it methodically and effectively. And if you don't join in on that, then you're going to be harmed by having a hostile relationship with us. It's a very interesting strategy. It's a strategy, of course, it seems the Pentagon has, they don't even think about those kinds of strategies. They're just thinking about military strategy all the time, while their opponent is actually coming up with an entirely different plan on this. But nonetheless, the United States continues to posture, continues to ruffle the feathers, continues to strong arm, and to even look like the strong man by doing things such as trying to piss off China by inviting the president of Taiwan to visit with the speaker in Los Angeles. It'll be interesting to see what happens if this meeting actually goes forward. It is scheduled for April 5th. Will the United States continue this posturing and rhetoric? Of course, the U.S. is very afraid of losing that dominance. That dominance is slipping, as we're seeing. The dollar is now dropped from major trading partners, China and Brazil. They're not going to be trading with the dollar anymore with each other. That is major news. So the U.S. is going to be escalating. We could definitely see the ramping up of the rhetoric, but I think my message today is I wouldn't be so afraid of a World War III with China like many of us have been worried about. Even I've been worried about this until really looking more into this. When you look at it economically, it is not likely. It is not likely that those Asian countries will join in. It is not likely that a single bullet will be fired between the United States and China. It is just not likely. But there's a lot more damage that could be done without even doing actual military warfare. Being cut off from goods and services is life-threatening in and of itself. As we've seen, it's a weapon the United States often uses. That's why we use sanctions all the time. So we'll be watching the news, following this story, following these escalations, these ramped up talks against China, and seeing how China ultimately reacts in the end. But it looks like they're doing, they're firing shots on their own end, which is continuing to drop the dollar everywhere they go. As they continue to form these relationships around the world, they're going to start saying to all these countries, let's just not do this in dollars. And that'll be enough.